This is the tragic story of a wedding which went horribly, horribly wrong. On Saturday, May the 13th, 1916, George Rhys Harris, the son of William Henry Harris, a retired sea captain turned farmer, was to be married to Frances Jones. At the groom's home, Cumporthman Farm at Blaenporth, near the Cardigan coast, a hired car with a chauffeur from Newcastle Emlyn was waiting to take the wedding party to Beulah Chapel, a few miles away. It was a local tradition to block the bride or bridegroom's way to the wedding, and children held ropes across the track that led the few hundred yards between the farm and the main road. They were moved, of course, when the car reached them. Another, noisier tradition was the firing of guns, and their neighbour, John Jones of Freed, stood by the gate with his gun ready to fire shots. Captain Jones of Dolwen also had his pistol ready to fire into the ground after the car passed the gate. John Jones was a farm labourer, and his 16-year-old son Evan John Jones was a farm servant at Cumporthman and wanted to join in the fun, so he asked his father if he could borrow his single-barrelled shotgun and a cartridge. He loaded the gun and placed the gun on a wall ready to fire after the car had passed. He could shoot, and he'd used the gun before. In the front of the car were the chauffeur, William Tudor Rhys, uncle of the groom and best man, and in the back George Harris, the bridegroom, and his sisters Mary Hannah and Julia Louisa Harris. The vehicle was a few yards from the main road and ready to turn left when a shot rang out. Julia suddenly slumped and slid on to her sister, who screamed, and everyone got out of the car. Julia was laid by the car, and everyone assumed she'd fainted until a black spot was seen near her shoulder blade. She'd been shot. She was taken to Captain Jones' house while the chauffeur drove off to Cardigan for a doctor, but unfortunately by the time he got back, it was too late for poor Julia. The wedding was, of course, postponed. Evan John Jones, the farm servant, was arrested and charged with manslaughter. Julia was buried on the other side of Cardigan at Brideth churchyard, the resting place of some of her other family members and her late mother, who had died 7 years earlier. Her father was buried with them in 1932. Evan John Jones' trial took place at the Cardiganshire Assizes in Lampeter. He explained he'd been watching Captain Jones and was going to take his cue from him when to fire the gun, but it went off by accident. He was acquitted. There were calls from the judge and jury to put an end to the custom of firing guns at weddings, and a local vicar joined in the condemnation, calling it a barbaric practice and saying, "The rowdyism, the erection of barriers across the road, the booing and shooting at weddings have frightened people from marrying publicly in a place of worship." I think Julia's death, which was widely reported, probably did mark the dying out of the custom of firing guns at weddings, but other barbaric practices haven't quite gone. I remember an incident about a decade ago where several larches, 2 substantial beech trees and an old oak were felled to block a bride's passage to chapel, and also blocked access for anyone else, including any emergency service vehicles which might have been required to use that route. Thankfully, no one died in that incident. The old Welsh tradition of codi quinten, chaining or halting the wedding, used to be done with ropes or straw decorated with flowers and ribbons. It was done after the wedding to represent the first and rather easily overcome obstacle that the married couple would encounter in their married life. A safer and more pleasant tradition. So if you're planning a Welsh wedding and fancy adding some folk customs, I'd go with this one if I were you. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.